Welcome to the chomp-man tutorial series. Based on the beloved classic arcade game Pac-Man, this project was created to be an easy-to-follow step-by-step guide that would give you the tools, techniques, and experience of creating a full game from start to finish. We've made all the original assets that we created for the game completely free. Links in the description below. For this project, if you wish to follow along step by step, you will need to first download the chomp-man project files, both of which can be downloaded in the downloads area of the tutorial site or from links in the description.
In our last video, we created the game over and player loss screen and mechanics. So in this Games Without Code video, we'll continue developing our game by adding our stage completion and progression system. So we're going to start by first going to our stage manager, and then we're going to go to our scene manager. And in our scene manager, we're going to go under our level 01 state, and we want to create a new state, and we're going to call this state start game. And let's make a transition from our countdown to our start game. So let's go inside of our transition. And for our transition, we just want that to check if our can start game boolean is true. And instead of using an update, we can actually create a custom trigger, and we can have our countdown trigger that once it's through. So let's go into our countdown state, and at the end, we're going to create a custom trigger event. And we're going to call this start game trigger. Now let's go into our level 01, and we're going to go back into our transition, and we're going to remove this update, and we're going to add a custom trigger. And for the name, we're going to say start game trigger. This way it'll allow us to save on resources, because the more update functions we use, the more resource intensive that our scripts are to our game. So before we continue, let's test out a custom trigger and make sure that it's working. So for now, we're going to disable our ghost, and let's go back into our stage manager, and let's hit play. So creating custom triggers is a great way of sending trigger events without having to constantly rely on the update node. So let's go to our scene manager, and we're going to move our set score text nodes to our start game state. Next, we want to add our logic to see if all the power pellets have been eaten and to trigger our level completion. So to do this, we first need to go into our dots prefab, and we're just going to drag this to our scene temporarily. And we need to add a subtraction node before it destroys our dots. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to subtract from our current dot amount scene integer. And then we wanted to use that total to set on our new current dot amount scene integer. Next, we want to go back to our scene manager, into our start state, and the logic we want to put in place is if our current dot amount equals 0, we wanted to set a level is complete variable. So let's first go into our applications, and let's create an application variable, and we're going to call that is level complete. And we're going to make that a boolean. So next we want to go to our scene variables. We want to grab the current dot amount, and we're going to check and see if that is less or equal to 0. And if that is, we want that to set is level complete to true. So before we continue to making our level completion state in our game manager, let's make sure everything is still working so far. So we can see we have a current dot amount of 159 dots. If we continue to go down, and we can see that our state machine is updating as well as checking to see how many dots we have left, if that's less or equal to 0. And we're gonna adjust this to 1. So we can see our application variable is level complete is true. So now that we have all that working, let's quickly go in for our scene manager. Since we're not using that, we're just going to remove these components, and we're going to change this to macro manager. And let's remove our dots, our dot prefab from our scene, and let's go into our game manager. And now let's set on our any state. We're going to do a transition to our level complete, and in that transition we're just going to say that if is level complete is true, we want to transition to our level complete. So let's go into our level complete state, and in our start, let's change this to set variables. So in our set variable state, we want it to change our level completion back to false. And we also want to make a new variable, which we're going to call can play game. And this is going to essentially shut off the input from our player character and our enemies. And for the last variable that we want to set a new current level. So what we're going to do is we just want to add 1 to our current level. So with that complete, we want to go back into our state manager. And we're going to create a new state, and we're going to call this state level complete. And we want to make a transition from our level 1 to our level complete. And instead of using an update to check if our level complete is true, let's create a custom event trigger, and let's just use that to trigger our level complete. So we're going to add this at the end of our level complete check. So let's create a custom event trigger, and we're just going to call this level complete. And then let's go back into our main state, and I'm just going to have that as our trigger. So for our level complete state, we're going to use a lot of the same logic that we used for our game over screen. So let's go get our game over screen nodes, and we're just going to copy these and paste them in our level complete state. And for our text, we're just going to say, instead of game over, we're going to say level complete. And now let's make a transition from our level complete back to our level picker. And in this transition, we're going to use that same logic that we used to go back to our main menu. So to test this out, let's create a state, and we're just going to call this state level 2 test. And we're going to make a transition from our picker to our level 2. And we're going to grab our logic that we have in our level 1 transition. And we just want to check if our current level equals 2, we want it to go into our level 2 test. And before we test this out, let's go back into our level 01 complete and let's switch out our sprites for our button. So we're going to go to our texture folders and we're going to go to UI. And let's go with our button next. So after enabling our button, and we're going to duplicate our button variable and we want to get our button image component. And we want to create a set sprite component. And we're going to grab our button next sprite and we're going to plug that in. So we're going to still hide our player score since our player is still currently playing the game. Let's remove our score variable in our set score node. And let's test this out before we continue. Main state, and let's set our current dot amount. I'm just going to set that to 1. So we can now see that we have our level completion screen. In a couple seconds, we have our next level button. And if we click next level, we see we are now taken to our level 2. And we can see our current level is again level 2. And our is level complete is set back to false, and our can player play the game is set to false as well. So with that complete, let's delete our level 02 test in our test transition. And let's move on to creating our character and our ghost spawning system.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to see this and many other tutorials, game development tips, interviews, and free game asset giveaways.